Sorry, I had to do it. I couldn't resist. For those who've been watching for a while, I've been cel-shading all the X-Men 97 figures. And last week, it was Bishop's turn. The figure itself wasn't bad, but the lighter shade of blue and the cel-shading make the figure look so much better. And today, I'm finally gonna work on Gambit. There's something about this figure that feels different right off the bat. The plastic feels more hollow than the other X-Men 97 figures. Like this figure feels more dated. Let's deconstruct this figure. There's an FAQ on the paint and brushes I use in the description box below. I believe this is an old Gambit body mold with an updated head, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, because the sculpt is pretty good. That said, there are some things I wish they updated, like the sleeves. They're very wrinkled. I assume this is done to hide the swivel and the joints, but when I look at reference images, his sleeves aren't that wrinkly. The other thing I noticed is that the torso is too long. He has 4 to 5 rows of abs here. Once you see it, it's hard to unsee. Another odd thing is that his staff is blue in the official artwork, but it's white or light silver in the show. Anyway, I'm excited to cel-shade Gambit today. So, hello, this is Ken. I like making things. Whether it's repainting my figures or making diorama displays, I love making things look awesome. My goal is to elevate my figures so they can shine on my display. Join my DIY venture as I ask myself the same question every week. Can I make it? First, let me try removing the coat. I remember seeing a comment in my Rogue video saying that the jacket can come off if I bend the arms back. So let me try it with Gambit. It feels impossible, but is it? Oh, it worked! Yay! The plastic feels slippery, so let me rough out the surface with the sandpaper. That way, the paint can grip onto the surface better. Alright, let's paint. I'm gonna start with the pink. The pink they use is more coral than pink. A cooler toned pink will look better on Gambit, so let's do that first. It's gonna take a few layers to get to full opacity. The rectangles on his legs are a bit tricky to paint, but right now I'm more focused on getting an even coverage than getting crisp straight lines, because I can always clean up the edges later with the black. Okay, next. Let me see if this is gonna work. I'm gonna do the lines on the upper torso with the micron pen now, so I don't have to worry about the paint clogging up the tip later. There are so many lines on the blue parts of his suit, especially his boots. I feel like the pen will not survive if I do the lines after I paint the boots. Alright, not bad. Let's work on the blue. The blue on the figure is a bit dull. It's punchier in the show. I have a neon blue that is the perfect shade, but the issue with this particular blue is that it's very sheer. It takes like 4 to 5 coats to get to full opacity. I want to reduce the amount of layers required. That is why I'm mixing it with my other blues so I can have a more opaque base layer first, and build up the opacity from there. Okay, the micron lines I did earlier are pretty much all gone now. Oh well, I tried. Next, the black. Let me mattify the texture and clean up the edges of the pink rectangles on his legs. I'm using the flat side of the brush to create straight edges, and then I'm gonna go in with a fine brush to make those edges really crisp and clean. Look at that, it's coming together nicely. I'm not gonna touch the sleeves yet, not until I put the coat back on. So let me do the cel-shading on the body first. First, the pink. I'm gonna darken it by adding a bit of red into it. The cel-shading on the torso is quite subtle. I see them mostly on the underside of his muscles, so let's do that. I'm not too concerned about the shading on the sides. Gambit's coat is gonna obstruct the majority of the body, except for the area down the middle. But I still want to do the sides. I feel like I'm getting better at it, and the more I do it, the more comfortable I feel. As for the rectangles on his legs, those probably will never see the light of day too, but it only makes sense that they are the darker shade of pink, since they are hidden beneath the coat. Okay, on to the blue shading. I don't think this matters as well, but I'm gonna paint the shoulder areas darker. It may or may not show with the jacket on, but I believe these are the areas underneath the jacket. I'm also gonna add this color to the back of his legs, and I'm gonna follow the curvatures of the calves, so the shapes look more organic and less like I cut the legs in half. As for the knee pads, my imaginary light source is somewhere in the top left, so I'm gonna apply the shading color onto the bottom right side of the knee pads. Alright, the body and legs are pretty much done. I'm gonna let the paint dry and add a coat of matte spray. Now that everything is dried, I'm gonna use my micron pen to do the black outlines. I don't know how much time I have left with this micron pen, so I'm gonna start with the torso, the body part with the most noticeable black outlines. The issue I'm encountering is that in the show, his muscles are very boxy. Like the muscle definition on his chest are like two straight lines, but on the figure it's much more curvier. And there's this extra space between his abs and the waist. Do I draw more abs on and try to reshape the chest muscles? I don't know. Let me line the blue parts first, and I'll come back to the pink later. Okay, I ignored the sculpted lines around the collar and kinda drew a star, like how it's usually depicted in the show. As for the legs, I'm just gonna outline everything I see. Let's hope the pen doesn't die on me. I'm trying my best not to apply too much force. I don't want the paint to clog up the tip. The pen isn't fine enough. I can't really reach all the grooves. I'm gonna switch to a brush instead. I feel more comfortable using a brush than a pen. I don't know why or how, but I tend to slip more often with a pen. Anyway, I'm now gonna do a stripe of black down each side of his legs, to give him that chrome look. Ignore what I'm doing to the knee pads. I'm just copying what I see here. Done! Ooh, I love how the legs turned out. They look better than I expected. Now let's put the coat back on. I have to be very careful so I don't wreck the paint on the body. Phew. The coat itself seems to be the right color, but the sleeves are slightly glossy. And on camera, the color is slightly off too. So I'm going to paint over the coat to make the color more consistent and, more importantly, mattify it. Okay, it actually took me a couple of tries to get the color right. It was drying too light, so I darkened it and it dried too red, but I think I finally got it to look right. As for the shading, I'm not gonna do too much. It appears that the cel shading is quite minimal in the show too, probably so it's easier to animate. So I'm mostly just gonna add a bit of shading down the sides, and follow the shapes of those folds around the armpit area. And just a bit more shading in the areas where shadows form. Okay, I am done with the shading on the coat. Let's seal everything and I'll add the black outlines after. I'm surprised the pen hasn't dried up yet. Letting the paint fully dry and adding a coat of matte spray seemed to help. On to the face. It may just be my copy. The paint app on the face isn't the best, but it's okay because I'm gonna paint over it anyway. According to the reference images, mostly from this particular episode, his skin tone has a bit of yellow tint to it, so I'm gonna try and match that. As for the shading, I'm gonna try and keep it more subtle as well. I don't want it to look distracting. It should be barely noticeable in the end. I can't tell if this is going well or terrible. Maybe it'll look better after I clean up the black areas. Here we go, looking better. On to the hair. This is pretty simple. Just a reddish brown on the hair and a darker brown as the shading color. Wait for the paint to dry and add a coat of matte spray. And add some black outlines. First with a pen, then a bit more with a brush. I love how the hair turned out. The face is fine. His eyes do look more intense though, and the cel shading isn't too bad. Alright, here's Gambit all cel shaded. At first glance it's quite similar, but the cooler pink is definitely better. And the back of his coat, I love it. I did a pretty awesome job considering that there was no reference for me to work off of. That said, there is still one issue with the jacket. The armpit holes are too tight around the arms. When I moved the arms, a bit of paint got scraped off. Thankfully, it's not super obvious, because it's still kinda hidden, and the colors of the paint and the plastic are very similar. But that also means this is another figure where I can't really move his arms too much. Boo! But he sure does look cool. Speaking of, when I was a kid, I had this other Gambit figure. I remember thinking that it was the coolest action figure I had. He looked so real. But looking at it now, it's clear that modern action figures have gotten so much better nowadays, even though this figure technically isn't new. Oh, the staff. I didn't film it, but I painted half of it white and the other half light blue, to give it that cel-shaded metallic look, and a layer of matte varnish for the extra layer protection. And speaking of cel shading, I like that the cel shading here isn't in your face, like you almost don't notice it. It just looks very natural. What do you think? Do you like what I've done? Do you like the cel shading? Let me know down below. Alright, let's end this for the photo shoot. I try not to say this every week, but I think this may be my best cel-shaded figure so far. Actually, I don't know. I still think I did a pretty good job with Wolverine, Bishop, and the Executioner. But this one feels a bit different. Like it felt like I knew what I was doing with the cel shading, but I also didn't. I think it's becoming more natural for me. Like I'm less intimidated by it. The Executioner sucked up a lot of my energy 2 weeks ago. I needed time to recharge. I'm glad I waited to do Gambit. I feel like I wouldn't have been able to do it if I did it a few weeks back. And now I can't wait to do the rest. Give this video a like and subscribe to see me do the rest of the X-Men. And until then, stay inspired and I'll see you next week. I can make it, so can you.